Hello friends, today's topic of discussion is Hindi cinema and women, and in the earlier lecture on the same theme we talked about that how the portrayal of women it has happened in Hindi cinema beginning from the colonial times when how women they were being portrayed on the screen, and how the feminist scholars they have in a way talked about that such kind of portrayals is largely concerned with regard to the objectification of women, and how women they have been objectified in advertising as well as in cinema as well. On the other hand, we have also seen that some kind of changes with regard to the depiction of women they also came during the 1970s 80s, when we find that the films which were concerned with the new wave or the new Indian cinema which was being made, where comparatively more significant roles they were being given to the women as well. And then in the 1990s, when the phase of liberalization begins, there also we find that how women they could find some kind of employment in other kinds of departments of filmmaking, and how in recent times with regard to the OTT and other platforms, women they have entered the filmmaking field, and how some of the women those who are associated in terms of writing scripts they are also writing some kind of roles for women where relevant aspects could be brought about or could be shown on the screen. So in that particular context, it is also being talked about that how the patriarchal society in the framework of India is definitely playing a role, where it is becomes some sort of an impediment in that sense, in terms of bringing about strong portrayals of women. And we find that cinema in a way reaffirms or reinforces these kinds of role in that setup, and how women they are generally being defined in terms of men, and their portrayals are largely concerned as nurturers, and their identity and position is seen in gender classification of daughters, wives and mothers. So their independent kind of existence or their independent portrayals that they are not happening, and her thinking and behavior shall conform to the patriarchal expectations of appropriateness in the social context as well. So these are the kinds of aspirations or the kinds of expectations which are there from women. And we find that how, if you talk about the new wave films, how they portray the social realities and the exploration of women's status and social roles, they also are favorite themes in these films. And some of the filmmakers like Shyam Benegal with his films Ankur, Nishant, Manthan and Bhumika created a new genre which is now called some kind of a middle cinema as well. And filmmakers like Govind Nihalani also in a way contributed in terms of playing an important role in the sense of the new wave films which were dealing with the social realities of those times. Then we also see, when you talk about these kinds of films like Ankur, Nishant, Manthan and Bhumika, all of them they were in a way trying to in a way show that how women they were relevant from the point of view of taking initiatives and decisions within the society, and how they are also being exploited in that sense in a feudal kind of a setup. So we find that even some of the women filmmakers like Sai Paranjape, who in a way made films like Sparsh, Katha, Chashme Badur, Disha, all of them some kind of a sensitivity or concern was also being shown by the women filmmakers as well. And when you talk about the new wave cinema, you also see that how this particular cinema also affected the formula films of those times, like Pratikhat, which was made by N. Chandra in 1987, and then Sherni in 1988 by Harmesh Malhotra, Zakhmi Aurat again with Dimple Kapadia in the lead, then Khoon Bhari Maang by Rakesh Roshan in 1998. And in these films we find that how women they are being shown as hardened, cynical and vengeful creatures, and how this kind of a change was some kind of a break from the stereotypical roles as submissive and dutiful mothers and wives. So we find that this kind of a change which came in 1980s, 90s, where we find that women they are being shown as some kind of characters, those who are ready to take revenge from the people, those who have given some kind of injustice to her or to her family members as well. So it was seen that how the new wave cinema, it affected the mainstream or the popular cinema as well. And such kind of portrayals, definitely they were seen as some sort of a break from the earlier roles, where women, they were being shown to be very submissive in nature, and they were playing some sort of a role where they were seen as appendage to men. And when you see some of the films of the 1980s, for example Prem Rog, which tells the story of a man's love towards a woman who is a widow and of a higher status as well, and conservatives, they are armed with age-old tradition and customs in their favor, which were challenged by the male protagonist who fights to marry a widow. So such kind of portrayals, they were in a way not new to the Indian society. When we see that the question of widow remarriage was being taken up in 1950s with Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar in the social religious reform movements, but in the context of cinema, we find that such kind of portrayals which were talking about the widow remarriage, they were not many in terms of numbers, because we find that despite the kind of legislation which has come in favor of women, that widows, they can remarry, but despite that we find that not many marriages in that context, they were not happening. And films definitely are going to bring that kind of a change, where Raj Kapoor, again for that matter, talks of a story where this kind of a reform is being talked about. And he also shows that how the people, those who are not in favor of such kind of reforms, those who want to persist with the kind of traditions which are very regressive in nature, and these kinds of customs which need some kind of a change, they are not being taken up by very seriously by the people as well, in that sense that the patriarchal setup does not allow even the male protagonist to even marry a widow of his own choice. So this film talked about not only the position of women, but it also generally talked about an important issue with regard to bringing about the reform or change in the Indian society. Then we also find that how some of the heroines like Rekha, Madhuri Dixit and Karishma Kapoor, how they also in a way tried to convey the concerns of the women in different eras or different periods. And we also find that women, they became louder in every sense in these films of 70s and 80s, with the voice articulation and the delivery of dialogue, sexual aggressiveness, and in terms of character as well. And initially we see that how Madhuri Dixit was decorative to begin with, but changed over slowly and steadily with Teza, followed by films like Beta Dil, culminating in Mrityu Dand, which is a film which was largely concerned with more of an acting rather than being only decorative in nature. So we find that such kind of substantial roles, they were being given to the women characters, and we also find that these kinds of changes, they could also be seen in the way that the women, they were being portrayed in cinema as well. Apart from that, we have also seen that some of the individual actresses like Taboo, how she was able to in a way strike a balance between the glamour and the convention, and not only her acting skills, but the way she has been characterized in some of the films like Astitva, Virasat, Chandni Maar, Makbul, Chinikam, Heather. All of them we find that she has been able to leave some kind of a mark. In Astitva, she is trying to convey the question of her identity, whether she has any kind of identity as an individual, or she is just a woman who is a wife of someone else. Then in other film like Chandni Bar, we have seen that this film was made by Madhur Bhandarkar, and this particular film, that how she has to in a way go to the world where she is being ogled by the men because she is working in a bar, and how she is able to take care of her own family with the kind of income she is able to generate by working in that particular situation. Apart from that, we have also seen her in Makbool, Haider, which are considered to be the kind of characters which are very layered in nature. And we have also seen that the way she has acted in Chini Kam, where she acted with Amitabh Bachchan as well. So we find that her portrayals have in a way have a lot of convention, and in that sense she has been able to do justice to many of the roles, especially one of the films called Andhadhun, which was made recently apart from the Drishyam series, the Drishyam 1 and the Drishyam 2. So we find that women definitely have been able to, especially such kind of strong female actresses, they have been able to show or communicate their identity in terms of their characterizations as well. And as we were talking about that some of the filmmakers, those who are not residing in India, but they are making films which are largely concerned with India and the Indian audience, and Deepa Mehta is one. Deepa Mehta's Fire, which was made in 1996, created a public outrage upon the release, and how the film portrayed the women in the roles which were completely non-conforming, keeping in the mind those times to the existing patriarchal norms, because they were shown to be lesbians, and the issue of women's rights, preferences, sexuality, they were also being talked about. And the question of women's will became important in that sense, and we find that nowadays all these kinds of issues they have been taken up at different levels in the media as well, and more people, they have become aware about such kind of issues as well. And the question of women's will definitely has found some kind of a concern with regard to the issues which have to be dealt about. Then we also see that how women, they have definitely the way they have been portrayed, especially with the change which came with the globalization and liberalization and the privatization. And we have definitely seen that when films like Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum, Kal Ho Na Ho, all of them, these films largely when they were being made, they were not only relating to the issues of globalization, but they were also concerning to the diaspora audience as well, that how the diaspora or the Indian diaspora which was there in Europe, America and in other regions of the world, and this particular diaspora was ready to see these kinds of films with which they could in a way relate. And the 90s was the period when we find that such kind of films which were slick productions, and these slick productions they were being shown to the kind of audience which was ready to savor them or in a way relish on them. Then we find that 1990s was also a period where a lot of changes which came with regard to the production, distribution and exhibition of the films, where more and more multiplexes they were being built, and some of the films which were to the specific audience, to the target audience, they were also being made as well. And we find that that during this particular period, small budget films which were catering to a particular audience, they could be exhibited in the cinema halls or the multiplexes. And if one sees the dynamics of these multiplexes, then we see that in a smaller hall of even 150, 200, if films they will be exhibited, then these films they will be able to do some kind of a business when these films they will be exhibited in a cinema hall of more than capacity of more than 1000. So these kinds of changes definitely came in the 1990s, and we find that how women of these particular times, they also became bold in that sense. But it will also be seen that even if they are skimpily clad or they are being bold or promiscuous, it does not mean that it was the empowerment of the women character. Rather, it only reduced her to a prop to satisfy the male audience. And we find that the issue of the item numbers, whether the Munni, Sheila or Chikni Chameli, all these popular item numbers, so they also in a way objectified the women, and how it was also being criticized by some of the scholars in terms of their objectification as well. And the ideas of female body, male gaze, voyeurism, all of them which the popular cinema relied on, are present in these item numbers as well. Then we also see that many of the films, they were in a way which were being made in 2000s and thereafter, some of the concerns or the issues of the contemporary times, they were being talked about in these films, and they also explored the taboo subjects of these times. As a film called Jism talks about the idea of sexuality in 2003, the issue of infidelity in Astittu, strong statement about the hypocrisy in the society and questions the realm of patriarchy. Then the idea of surrogacy is being talked about in Chupke Chupke Chori Chori. Issue of live-in relations is being talked about in Salam Namaste and Chak De India. The conflict women face when they decide to excel in field chosen by them. So we find that different kinds of films, they were trying to portray the different issues which are there in the society. And there was another film called Shabash Mithu, which was made recently again on a very famous filmmaker, on a very famous sportswoman in cricket, and how this film also talks about that how women, they face a lot of conflict when they decide to excel in any field which they choose for themselves. And we also see that some of the filmmakers over a period of time, how they have tried to show women as more bold and empowered characters, those who are ready to lead their life on their own terms, and they are ready to take their own decisions, and they are being shown as some kind of rebels who are not ready to conform to the societal norms, and then they excel in their professions as well. Filmmaker like Madhur Bhandarkar made such kind of cinema called films like Chandni Ba, Satta, Corporate, Fashion, Heroine. All these films which were made by him, they were trying to communicate that kind of an idea. We also see that some of the filmmakers, they are in a way against the stereotypes in that sense which are being shown. And actresses, they also accepted the bold roles which were being given to them, whether the Vidya Balan in Pa, Dirty Pictures, Kahani or Ishqiya, or Konkona Sen Sharma in Page 3, Wake Up Said, Life in a Metro. So we find that how the female actresses or actresses, they have in that sense were ready to accept these kinds of roles where they can bring about some kind of a change. So that was some kind of a welcome step in that sense. And it was not only in the context of 2000s and later, but we find that in the earlier times, actresses like Smita Patil, Shabana Azmi, Nandita Das, Jaya Bachchan, all of them, they have appeared in some sort of strong and independent roles which shifted camera's focus from the women's body to her identity as an individual. And this could be seen in the films of all of them, that how Jaya Bachchan in Guddi or Mili for that matter, or Smita Patil in various films where she has acted, whether it's Manthan for that matter, or the other films where she has acted, or Shabana Azmi for that matter, not only a film called Arth, but other films as well which were by the new wave filmmakers. But apart from that, she also acted in the popular cinema as well. So we find that all of them in a manner differently, they try to bring about that kind of a change as well. And a film called Lajja, made by Rajkumar Santoshi in 2001, talks about various issues of the society, whether dowry, domestic violence, sexual exploitation, male domination, female infanticide, and women's low status. All of them, they have been talked about in this particular film. Then we also see that, as I told you, one of the films which was dealing with the issue of widow remarriage, as earlier we talked about. Similarly, another film by Deepa Mehta is again set in the similar background, where she is exploring the lives of the widows at an ashram in Varanasi, India, and how water is some sort of is a film which is seeing their situation in the 1940s, and it covers the various controversial subjects such as misogyny and ostracism. And we find that these kinds of issues with regard to the superstitions and the hypocrisy which is there in the society, in the life of the women, it becomes miserable. And it also deals with the issue of child marriages, that how child marriages, they were leading to more and more widows as well. And this film is also talking about the concern which was raised by Gandhi for the emancipation of women. And the male protagonist in the film is also inspired by the Gandhian ideals and ready to remarry widows. In the similar lines, we find that there was another film called Babul, in which Amitabh Bachchan acted, and this film is basically also talking about the theme of widow remarriage. And we find that in the end, Amitabh Bachchan, who is the father-in-law of the female protagonist, gets her married to another boy by himself, doing Kanyadan in the film, and symbolically becoming her father. So we find that such kind of portrayals, where conservative elements in the films, they do not want that these kind of changes they should come in the society. But films like Water, films like Babul, time again they talk about the concerns which are there in the society as with regard to the widow remarriage, and they in a way try to communicate that these kinds of changes will only come when the people, those who are concerned, they are ready for these kinds of changes, because the legislation alone will not be able to bring that kind of a change. And as in this particular film, Amitabh Bachchan was the one, despite being the father-in-law of the girl, he becomes the father in that sense, that he is ready to marry her off after the death of his own son. Then we also see that other films, how they also try to show the traditional values and the new kinds of changes which are coming. And many of the films in recent times, we have seen that how they try to show the individuality, the ambition and the boldness in their own films. And one of them was English Wenglish in 2013, which was talking within the framework of the self-actualization, in which Devi acted, that how she is able to in a way attain her own happiness in life. Then we have also seen, especially after 2000s, a number of films which are dealing with the themes connected to women, whether Gangubai Kathiawadi, then Dhakad in 2020, Shabash Mithu in 2022, Thappad, then Panga, Chapak, Paglet, all of them, all these particular films, they are trying to show the individuality of the women characters, and the kind of voice which has been raised by the women characters, whether in Thappad that she is not ready to take any kind of a violence against her by her husband for that matter, or in another film where we find Panga for that matter, we find that how the female characters, they are ready to go beyond the kind of restrictions which have been imposed on them by the patriarchal society. Then Chapak, for that matter, dealt with an important concern, that how women, those who have been victim of such kinds of acid attack, and how they can in a way bring about the change in the society through their sustained efforts. And Sabash Mithu again, where women, not only the lead character but others as well, those who decide to participate in the kind of activities, sports for that matter, as it happened in the case of the other films as well. So we find that the coming of the OTT has brought about a lot of change, where we find that the empowerment of women could be reflected, and how more women, those who have entered the filmmaking business by doing a lot of diversified work, and OTT is completely free of such kind of a bias as well. So we find that during the contemporary times, there is some kind of a paradigm shift in the kind of content, and this is not just having about a caste in that sense that is led by women. Rather, we find that the content driven by women is in the leading roles are also no more about family drama or usual saas bahu range. Rather, some kind of a new, refreshing, diverse kind of a viewpoint is being shown in the films, and we find that there are so many web series which are dealing with the issues of women, and we find that all these web series, whether the Fame Game, Maharani, Aranyak, Ye Kali Kani Aankhein, all of them, all these kinds of web series which are being led by the women, they are also bringing about some kind of a refreshing change with regard to the various kinds of portrayals with regard to women. And we also find that such kind of portrayals over a period of time definitely will bring that kind of a refreshing change, where we will find that more and more women characters they are taking lead in the various platforms, whether the cinema or OTT. So in that sense, we find that in terms of themes, in terms of treatment, a lot more changes they are being required as well. And we have also seen that the evolution of women's portrayals, that has also been taken up. So with this, I'd like to end the discussion. Thank you very much.